Okay, so to demonstrate that, why don't we go on to the second clip, and we'll hear a single version of it, and then we'll hear that line doubled.
This wise ass getting wiser, throwing more fuel on the fire. This wise ass getting wiser, throwing more fuel on the fire.
So this is the, I guess, death growl example. And then we'll come back and talk about if you treated this one any different. Okay, so that's what the raw material you had. Was there anything additional that you would have changed in the way you processed this, or options you might have used that you didn't use in the first example of just the grit vocal?
Oh, yeah. With the growl, what I did is I ran it through the distressor again with relatively similar settings. I used a little bit of a slower release. And with EQ on this one, we high-passed at 150, cut at 200, cut at 460, high-shelved around the same place. 2300 and 6K. And then for the compressor, again, we used the 1176 sim, 8-to-1 ratio, attack 3, release of 5, and for the reverb, moderate pre-delay, moderate room size, and a high pass of 1.5K this time.
Now, with the death growl, you were saying on most vocals you're cutting out a lot of low end. I know there's a lot of misconception on this one. With something that's that low in range, are you leaving more bass in it, or do you find that you're actually cutting more or just treating it the same as the main vocal?
I'm actually taking more out.
I know a lot of people are trying to add a lot of punch, especially if they feel like the vocalist hasn't really hit bottom or it isn't full enough. And I think they don't realize that all they're doing is tossing mud into the middle of the performance and making it sound weaker.
Yup, and you have to, vocals are one thing, you gotta get it right at the source. It's very important. The processing's the icing on the cake. But if you have a vocalist that has no great dynamics to his voice, no punch to his voice, you're in trouble. You're not gonna get that with processing.
Well, let's hear the death growl or low end section with Greg's processing. Now, as far as getting that to sit in the mix, do you find that lower-end sections like that have to be treated a little differently because I guess they're not going to be competing as much on the high end, or are they?
It really depends again. It depends on how dynamic you want the mix to be. Sometimes you'll want, if you have a grit section, a growl section, a clean section, you want them to have different intensities. For this particular song, we pulled the growl back a little bit. We wanted to make it there, but we didn't want to make it obnoxious. And so what we did is, with the high end, we get a little bit more of a boost on the high end because there's less high content in the first place. And then also, we got rid of more low end. And the more you high pass, the more something stands out. So this is how we brought that up and got it seated nicely without being overbearing.
Okay, so let's see how that one sits and add it into the mix. So I guess the covering the other end of the range, the last example we'll do will be a higher end screen and see what you were working with, and then we'll talk about the processing on that. Now, with something like that, do you treat that any differently than you did, say, the other two examples?
Oh, yes. We ran this through the distressor again with a 6-to-1 ratio, attack on 5, release on 4, input gain around 7 decibels of gain reduction. You don't need as much with the high screams. They're not as dynamic for the most part, and you're not pushing, really as much air. Mm-hmm. You have the output below clipping, again, band emphasis again on the LP on detector and distortion 2 on the audio. We high pass these at 200 hertz, cut at 460, high shelf at 3K, boost at 7K. It sits higher in the range, you EQ it higher. The compressor, we used a less of a ratio, 6-to-1, attack on 5, release on 4. Stereo widening, again, with similar settings as the last time. And reverb, we had a little bit less room size because it's already in the higher register. You're not going to need as much to get it to kind of stand out. So we took back the wetness of the verb a bit, and we high-passed that verb, though, a little bit lower at 500 hertz because you want some of this body. You want to add some of it, so you don't want to take away too much from the reverb. That's going to give it a little bit of posterity in the mix.
Now that you detailed that, let's see about hearing it in the mix, and you can talk about if it's seated any different than the others. So again, just like with the others, was there any way that did you have to change anything to get that to sit where it did, as opposed to the other example?
For this, only just a tiny bit. It's again, the vocalist technique helps a lot. If you have the great technique and you're a good vocalist, it's going to make things easier to see things in a mix. What we did is we actually took it down a tiny bit in volume compared to the other grit vocals that were nearby it, because it just sat easier by itself.
For something like that, like say a scream that stands out by itself, or is not as much part of a vocal line than it is kind of a punch, is there any way, panning wise or separation with the doubles or layers, that you might change that would be different than how the main verse vocal is sitting, or do you just kind of see if you can get it to ride in exactly as is?
It depends on how the vocals are tracked, really. What I'll do is, if you have a single set of doubles, I'll always just have them right underneath and EQ to taste. A lot of the time I like when a vocalist will do more than one double. Obviously now it's not a double anymore, it's a triple vocal. You pan them to taste left and right. You'll scoop, maybe a tiny bit of more low end out of those. You may use different reverb on them. It all depends on the track.
One last thing as far as processing that is pretty common, and I see a lot of things that go, pro and con on it. My opinion is that it's not as bad as what many people say, and what I'm about to talk about is use of distortion on vocals. Some people think it's a cop-out, or it's making up for somebody who can't sing aggressively enough. I've always seen it as just kind of an effect that it can work, and it's just, a tonal color. But at the same time, I do agree that if it's used on every track all the time, and it's just being used to cover up the vocalist or to try and make them sound more extreme than they really are, then that is a little bit lame. But what are your feelings on the use of distortion with aggressive vocals, and just any general thoughts about what you would use, why you would or wouldn't, and what ones you might use yourself?
Okay, well, I branched it off into two categories like we were talking about before. You have the effect, and then you have tonal coloration. We'll start with the effect part. It's awesome to have a line that just stands out that's distorted like crazy. When you're going to do that kind of line, you're going to have to be very careful with your EQ. Generally, if you're doing a distorted line, something like a telephone EQ will work better, because you want to work a boost in the high mid-range. You don't want to have too much low mids, because it starts to sound gargled and nasty. Mm-hmm. So, limit the bandwidth. Get it seated in a nice place. Use maybe a tiny bit of reverb. There's your effect. It'll sound cool. You could start off a verse with it. You could pop it in somewhere, whatever makes you happy. Now, if you're using it on death vocals or gritty vocals or stream vocals, it's great. Just use it sparingly. Don't go nuts. Don't take that knob and start cranking it. A lot of people are like, but the knob's barely moving. Yeah, don't look at the knob. Listen to the fucking track. People do that all the time. Stop mixing with your eyes. Mix with your ears, dude. It's not, it's not that hard of a concept.
It's funny that it actually goes for doing vocals live, too, is people definitely tend to hear with their eyes. It's somebody will let out a controlled scream, and it just won't seem that impressive if they're actually good at it and have discipline and put it out at a regular volume. But then you do the metal face and sneer at somebody, and all of a sudden, to them, it sounds like it's way louder than it was. It's because they heard it with their eyes.
Yeah, same reason why some people look at bands, and before they even listen to them, they're like, this band sucks.
Exactly.
But, as humans, we're aesthetically driven creatures. It's pretty unfortunate. It's good in some ways, bad in others.
Especially when it comes to vocal mixing, because nobody's going to see your dials when they listen to your song.
Yep, and no one's going to see the person who made the vocal happen until they see them live.
Exactly.
Or, see them on an album cover or whatever. But the point is, people don't watch the radio.
As far as overall, handling vocals, vocal mixing and stuff, you have any just last pieces or things that you feel like someone just getting into this or trying to dispel some myths or anything, just some pieces of advice or things you want to add in about it?
Yeah, absolutely. I could do that, and I could recap a little. So
sure.
First off, make sure you know what you're doing behind the microphone. Great technique is going to make a huge difference. And if you have problems with vocals, find a vocal coach. It's really important. No matter how many takes you do. I had a session recently that I had a vocalist who I did over 1,000 takes for a song for.
Good God.
And you should have seen the look of agony on my face when I was done. I think it was almost worse being done than going through it because of what I had experienced. They say it's not the end, but it's the journey. But I think that journey was miserable. Oh, God. But still, I knew after all that happened, it was going to need a lot of work to make it right. What am I going to have to do now? I'm going to have to tune it. I'm going to have to comp it. I'm going to have to align it. Yeah. So make sure you're ready to do it. Practice the material, because knowing it is going to be great. It's going to be a lot better than trying to pull off vocals on the spot for a song you're not comfortable with. So that's important. Audition different microphones. It's a great idea when you're tracking. Like I said before, SM7 seems to work a lot. Even a 58 will work great. Some people love it on screams. Something like a Rode NT1A, you want to make sure it's not too bright of a mic for you, but that's why we audition it. And the Audio-Technica mics, I think it's like the AT4030. I don't own one, but I've heard great things about them. You just got to try things out.
Got it.
And use a pop filter. It's important. You don't have to get any 18-layered one. One layer should do just fine. If you have a sibilant vocalist, you could angle the mic off a little bit to make things work. The room is important. Make sure there aren't tons of reflections. Make sure there's not tons of computer noise. It's going to get brought up in your recording, and you are going to be miserable.
A lot of people forget that when tracking in the room, and they shut off the monitors, they put on headphones, they worry about all this other kind of bleed, and they forget about the computer sitting down there giving that low-end hiss that's just going to sit in the bottom of the mix somewhere.
Yeah, and people keep forgetting it's going to be there no matter what, and you're only bringing it up because we know you're going to be compressing those vocals. And what's going to happen? You're going to hear...
Yeah. So if anybody wanted to get in touch with you or find out about getting some processing done or maybe even some training from you, how would people reach you, and tell them a little bit about your studio, where you're located, all that basic info?
Okay, well, I'm hailing out of Long Beach, New York here. I don't know why, but this is where I ended up, probably because I grew up here. And you can get in touch with me a lot of different ways. I'm on AOL Instant Messenger. I will tell you this because I will probably answer you if you IM me. And I will change my screen name if too many people do this. Are you ready? It's Lolz Greg. LOLZGREG. That's a great way to get started. If you want to get to me immediately, if I'm on, you can. Otherwise, your best bet is to email me at greg@thetomatofarmstudio.com. That's the webpage. We're working on getting it up right now. And the email gets checked every day. You have a question? I have an answer. You can also find me on the Andy Sneap forum as Lolz Greg. And I know a lot of guys frequent that place, especially who love metal. So I'll answer questions there, And I offer tons of services, and I'll be sure to do great for your project. So get in touch with me.
Very cool. And just for people who might not know where the Andy Sneap forum is, it's under the ultimatemetal.com banner, under their listing of forums, the Andy Sneap production forum. Beyond that, last piece of information for people who might want to get in touch is, are you working both with live tracking and accepting like pre-recorded remote material, or just one or the other?
Oh, absolutely. I do tons of mixing for projects. I prefer to track myself, but it's not always an option. Just because of the fact that you live in a different country, in a different state, in a parallel universe, should not stop you from working with me. I love taking on projects, different kind of projects. I'm great at just about anything. So, if you have a project you want to work on, I will handle it.
Very good. I want to thank Greg again for coming on and sharing quite a bit of knowledge that a lot of people hide their tricks of the trade and stuff. So I think he's being pretty generous on this. And thanks for coming on. And I guess we will go ahead and drop out with a little bit more of his treatment of some of the vocals on the Voice of Dissent project. And I will see you next time.
All right. Thanks a lot, Rodney.